I took my yellow jacket. Yeah. Just in case.
And the camera won't be okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I bumped into the mayor of Terrace, BC.
Next week or the week?
The mayor of Terrace, BC was there. Yeah, there we go. Okay, apologies for being a minute late. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Just as I begin, I'd like to welcome Ron Bedard, the president and CEO of Dofasco. Thank you, Ron, for coming here today. More substantively, thank you for leading one of Canada's great steel companies, but also for helping us in designing some of these support measures that I'm going to talk about today and some of that we put in place. This is an important day for Canada's workers. We know the world's changing. We know that this decades-long process of our ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States has ended. And as a consequence of that, many of our strengths have become our vulnerabilities, particularly in those industries that are most tightly integrated with the United States. Headline, last year, 75% of our exports went to the U.S. 90% of our lumber exports went to the U.S. 90% of our aluminum exports went to the United States. 90% of our steel exports went there, all bound for a single market that has changed. Overall, for the Canadian economy, we estimate that U.S. tariffs and the uncertainty that they're creating will cost Canadians around 1.8% of GDP. That's about $50 billion lost from our economy, or the equivalent of $1,300 for every Canadian. And this is happening fast. It's a rupture, which means that our economic strategy needs to change dramatically and rapidly. And that change is in Budget 2025, our plan to confront these challenges and emerge even stronger, to move our economy from reliance to resilience, and to give ourselves far more than any foreign nation can ever take away. Le budget vise à bâtir un Canada fort en mettant l'accent sur ce que nous pouvons contrôler, c'est-à-dire bâtir ici, chez nous, afin de protéger les Canadiens et Canadiennes et de leur donner les moyens de réussir. Stimuler notre productivité pour assurer une prospérité durable. Transformer la façon dont le gouvernement travaille pour vous. Diversifier nos partenariats commerciaux à l'étranger afin de créer plus de possibilités et d'accroître notre indépendance. The core of the strategy in Budget 2025 is to unleash $1 trillion in total investments in Canada over the course of the next 5 years. That alone will increase our GDP by over 3.5%, or $3,500 for every Canadian worker, more than twice what's being taken from us. Now, to help get there, we must protect our workers and our industries who are most exposed to U.S. tariffs. That means in steel, aluminum, auto, and lumber sectors. Help them bridge to the future. Nous avons déjà pris des mesures décisives pour limiter les exportations d'acier étranger. Devenir notre meilleur client en achetant canadien. Permettre à nos industries stratégiques de se diversifier et de conquérir de nouveaux marchés. Protéger nos travailleurs et nos industries qui sont touchés par les droits de douane américains. Back in July, we restricted foreign steel imports entering Canada's market. expanded training and income support for steel workers, and provided liquidity relief for businesses. The government, for example, provided a $400 million loan to help Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie to transition to a business model that's less reliant on the United States. In August, we introduced new measures to help the softwood lumber industry stay competitive, including financing for company restructuring, investments to diversify products, income and training supports for affected workers, and prioritizing Canadian lumber in home building. In September, we launched a comprehensive industrial strategy with new reskilling programs, a new $5 billion strategic response fund to help businesses pivot to new markets, and we announced that we would create a new Buy Canadian policy across federal agencies. We also reduced red tape and increased loan limits to help large firms access the liquidity that they need. These measures are working. We've received close to 1,500 applications from companies across the steel, aluminum, lumber, manufacturing, automotive, and seafood sectors through our regional tariff response initiative. In the steel sector alone, more than 230 firms have applied and support's already being delivered. So some examples. Because of these initiatives, Cherubini Metal Works in Nova Scotia is modernizing its metal and fabrication lines to export more products overseas. And Hooper Welding in Hamilton will grow its capacity to produce fabrication equipment required for Canadian and international energy projects. Grâce à ce financement ciblé, les entreprises canadiennes intègrent de nouvelles technologies, lancent de nouveaux produits pour diversifier leur marché, s'assurent de jouer un rôle dans les chaînes d'approvisionnement nationales et, par ces améliorations, participent à des missions commerciales partout dans le monde. Our investments are also protecting workers, providing relief to nearly 37,000 Canadians during this period of uncertainty. So far, they've prevented more than 14,000 Canadians from losing their job. More broadly, across our economy, employment is rebounding after the early impacts of the trade war. More than 120,000 total jobs have been created since March. What we're doing today is to reinforce that momentum with new strengthened measures to accelerate the transformation of the Canadian steel and lumber industries, to build strong domestic demand for their products, and to empower their workers and businesses to seize new markets at home and abroad. So these new measures focus on three core objectives. First, to further limit foreign steel imports so as to increase domestic demand for Canadian steel producers. Second, to make it easier to buy and build with Canadian steel and lumber. And third, to invest in workers and businesses so they have the tools and the resources that they need to drive this industrial transformation. So let me start with limiting foreign steel imports to ensure that our steel producers have a bigger share of our market. Doing so will unlock hundreds of millions of dollars in domestic demand for those producers. We will reduce tariff-free steel imports from non-free trade area partners from 50% of 2024 levels, as it is today, to 20% of those levels. This will open up more than $850 million in new domestic demand for Canadian steel. Second, we will reduce tariff-free steel imports from non-CUSMA free trade area partners from 100% of 2024 levels to 75% of those levels, unlocking more than $540 million in additional market access for our producers. We'll impose a global 25% tariff on targeted imported steel derivative products, such as wind towers, prefabricated buildings, fasteners, and wires, to grow demand for Canadian-made steel. Those products as a whole represent about a $10 billion market. And we will toughen our broader compliance measures to prevent foreign steel dumping, To do so, the Canadian Border Service Agency will be equipped with a dedicated steel compliance team, enhanced detection of false declarations, and expanded online reporting tools. Our temporary horizontal remission of Canadian tariffs on imports has helped Canadian businesses deal with the early impacts of those tariffs. However, over the longer term, such broad remissions would only hurt Canada's steel sector. So to move away from relying on imported steel and to give Canadian companies time to adjust their supply chains to use Canadian steel, those temporary remission measures will end on January 31st, 2026 for steel used in Canada for manufacturing, food and beverage packaging, and agricultural production. Now, the second broad way to drive transformation of our strategic industries is by becoming our own best customer. So we'll build big with Canadian suppliers, investing in roads, bridges, homes, and community centers. A bit later this year, we'll implement that Buy Canadian policy, which will ensure that Canadian materials, including steel and lumber, are prioritized in all contracts over $25 million, and that this applies across federal grants and contribution programs, especially those in infrastructure. To maximize the use of Canadian softwood lumber in housing and infrastructure, we will prioritize shovel-ready, multi-year projects that can begin in the next 12 months using, of course, Canadian wood. With a funding allocation of roughly $700 million next year, Build Canada Homes, our new federal home building agency, this alone will create $70 to $140 million of new demand for Canadian wood products and attract private and provincial capital to multiply that impact. In order to build on that, I'm announcing today that we will make it more affordable to transport Canadian steel and lumber across this country by cutting freight rates for transporting steel and lumber interprovincially by 50%. We'll do that through funding directly Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railways. And finally, we will increase protections for Canadian steel and lumber workers and those businesses so they can adapt and seize new opportunities. We'll help employers retain workers by expanding our earlier supports and enhancing our work-sharing programs, increasing income replacement ratios, income replacement benefits from 55% to 70%. We will also provide an additional $500 million to the Business Development Bank of Canada's Softwood Lumber Guarantee Program to ensure that companies have the financing and the credit support that they need to maintain and restructure their operations during this period of transformation. And similarly, we will deploy $500 million in funding under the Large Enterprise Tariff Loan Facility, specifically for softwood lumber firms, the larger ones facing liquidity pressures. We'll make it easier for the forestry sector to access federal support by establishing a single window for applications, a one-stop shop to help companies navigate our broad suite of support programs. And lastly, we will launch a Canadian Forest Sector Transformation Task Force that seeks input and recommendations from provinces, territories, and industry on how to seize new opportunities in softwood lumber and create new growth in the sector. Ces mesures de soutien, jumelées à celles mises en place plus tôt cette année, permettront aux producteurs d'acier canadiens et de bois d'œuvre canadiens de bénéficier d'un accès au marché intérieur représentant des centaines de millions de dollars. En effet, c'est plus de milliards de dollars. Elles créeront de nouvelles possibilités pour les travailleurs à mesure que la demande intérieure augmentera et offriront aux entreprises le soutien dont elles ont besoin pour s'adapter au contexte mondial en pleine évolution. Nous veillons à ce que les entreprises canadiennes du secteur de l'acier et de bois d'œuvre disposent des capitaux, des talents et du temps nécessaires pour acquérir les compétences, les outils et les installations qui leur permettront de contribuer à bâtir une économie canadienne forte. The hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure and housing investments that Budget 2025 will unleash will create significant demand for Canadian steel and lumber, as will our new trade and investment partnerships around the world. Last week, I was in Abu Dhabi, where the UAE announced their decision to invest $70 billion in Canada. In Johannesburg, for the G20, we launched discussions towards a Canada-South Africa Foreign Investment Promotion and Partnership Agreement that will deepen investment between our two nations. And we agreed to launch comprehensive free trade talks with India, the world's fifth largest economy. Nous avons entamé des négociations commerciales avec EAE et les Philippines et la Thaïlande, et nous travaillons dans la finalisation de notre accord avec l'ANAS. Cela s'ajoute aux accords que notre gouvernement a déjà conclus avec l'Indonésie, l'Équateur, l'Union européenne et l'Allemagne. Les pays du monde entier souhaitent investir au Canada et bâtir avec nous. Nous réalisons les investissements stratégiques nécessaires pour que nous puissions produire et exporter plus de ce dont le monde a besoin, notamment de l'acier canadien et de bois d'œuvre canadien. The Canadian steel and lumber industries will always be at the heart of Canada's competitiveness, our security, and our strength. These are sectors that reflect our country's character, resilient and forward-looking, with a history of reinventing themselves at pivotal moments. Et à ce moment charnière de notre histoire, le Canada passe de la dépendance à la résilience. Nous pouvons nous donner bien plus que ce que n'importe quel gouvernement étranger ne pourra jamais nous enlever. Nous bâtissons une seule économie canadienne au lieu de 13. Nous bâtissons ensemble de projets d'intérêt national. Nous réalisons des investissements sans précédent dans notre défense et notre sécurité et nous diversifions nos relations commerciales. We'll build Canada strong with the workers and the resources that build our communities strong. Canadian workers, Canadian steel and lumber. With them, we'll build Hamilton strong, Sault Ste. Marie strong, Saguenay fort, Miramichi fort, for Canada fort, Canada strong. Thank you. Merci. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We're now going to begin the question portion of the press conference. We've got about 20 minutes for questions. Première question, Catherine.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Kate McKenna with CBC News. How do you explain to your caucus, particularly caucus members who might be quite hesitant, that your government is going to be working with the government of Alberta potentially towards a pipeline deal?
Well, the first thing is I'm blessed to be a member of a fantastic caucus. A caucus that represents every province in this country, caucus members from the north, the largest women's caucus in Canadian history, the largest Indigenous caucus. So we have a diverse caucus in all respects, and we enjoy a very open and engaged dialogue. And I will say specifically to today's announcement, not tomorrow's announcement, I'll say specifically to today's announcement, that our caucus members in Hamilton, in Sault Ste. Marie, in Quebec, in BC, across this country, in Atlantic Canada, New Brunswick, those caucus members have a very good sense of what's going on in the steel industry, in the forest products industry, and they've helped shape this package, as have members of industry, unions, and others. With respect to tomorrow's intended announcement with Alberta, the Memorandum of Understanding, it is about much more than one thing. It is, and fundamentally, it's about building this economy. It's about making Canada more independent, and it's about making Canada more sustainable. So I would suggest that we wait until the full announcement is made tomorrow so you can see it in the room. En français, en ce qui concerne le caucus, j'ai eu la chance d'avoir un caucus très divers, un caucus avec des membres dans chaque province au nord du Canada, le plus grand caucus des femmes dans l'histoire du Canada, le plus grand caucus des peuples autochtones dans l'histoire du Canada. C'est un caucus ouvert avec des bonnes discussions et une caucus, des membres du caucus à travers le pays de Colombie-Britannique, à Nouvelle-Écosse, y compris Québec, en forme cette annonce aujourd'hui. Cette annonce aujourd'hui parce qu'ils savent, ils et elles savent la situation dans le secteur de l'acier et de bois d'œuvre. Premier point. Deuxième point, en ce qui concerne le protocole d'accord avec Alberta, l'annonce pour demain, ce protocole est plus grand qu'un oléoduc. Oui, il y a un aspect là, mais au fond, c'est un protocole qui va renforcer l'économie canadienne, qui va renforcer l'indépendance canadienne, qui va renforcer la soutenabilité de notre économie. Alors, on peut discuter tous les aspects demain quand vous pouvez le voir ensemble. Merci.
My follow-up question is on U.S.-Canada trade. You've said that you want to get the best deal for Canada and that you're not rushing to any sort of deal. Do you get the sense that other countries regret the deals that they've made with President Trump?
It's a question for them. Look, I think this is what I'll say about other countries. Every country wants to do a deal with Canada. Or if they have a relationship with Canada, they want to deepen that relationship with Canada. And this is a real opportunity for us. Of course, we want to further improve the existing trading relationship with the United States. We stand ready to re-engage when they are. But at the same time, we're going to do a few other things. First and foremost, build this economy, to be masters in our home, mettre chez nous. And invest and make sure our strategic industries are there when we need them. And then secondly, to develop those commercial relationships abroad. And I think you're seeing, given the scale of agreements that we're concluding and launching, and the time frame, and I'll make one last point and then pass to your colleague if I may, which is, when we're announcing these free trade deals, for example, with India, the start of the intention for negotiations, or with Thailand or the Philippines as three recent examples. The intention is to conclude these in a year. Okay, this is not let's have a 5 to 8 year long process. Let's focus. Let's take the opportunity. Let's diversify. Let's build out, and that itself will start to seal. We have to conclude these, obviously, but we want to have, and final point on it if I can, sorry, I think I've already beyond my final point, but this is one of the many reasons why we want to make sure that we maintain the capacity in our steel industry, in our lumber industry, in our aluminum industry, and other strategic industries, and the workers as much as possible, like in their roles and their jobs, because demand is coming. We're creating that demand, and that's a big part of what this announcement today is about. Merci.
Bonjour, M. Carney. Mylène Crête de la presse. Pourquoi ne pas, pour l'industrie du bois d'œuvre, pourquoi ne pas avoir annoncé un plan de sauvetage avec une subvention salariale comme c'était demandé?
Au fond, il y a des soutiens pour les travailleurs dans le secteur du bois d'œuvre, les changements de niveau de remplacement des salaires des travailleurs dans le secteur du bois d'œuvre, y compris le secteur de l'acier. Et dans ce contexte, c'est plus facile c'est plus rentable et facile de garder, de maintenir l'emploi des individus, parce que on peut avoir des temps partiels. Et avec les discussions avec les sociétés dans le secteur, le ratio, si je peux dire comme ça, le ratio était, jusqu'à maintenant, était 55%. Et c'était, en effet, c'était plus trop bas. Alors, nous allons l'enlever à 70%. Et ça va aider beaucoup. Ça, c'est le conseil des sociétés dans le secteur. Ça c'est le premier point. Oui.
Ma deuxième question va porter... Est-ce que vous avez terminé? Oui.
Oui,
Oui.
je peux. Je dois terminer maintenant. Okay.
Ma deuxième question porte sur la semaine prochaine. Est-ce que vous allez aller aux États-Unis? Et si oui, comptez-vous rencontrer Donald Trump?
Oui. En effet, oui. Oui et oui.
Vous allez aux États-Unis?
Oui. Il y a un événement. Et oui, c'est planifié d'y aller pour l'événement de la Coupe mondiale. C'est un événement de comment on dit, on choisit les matchs, en effet, les groupes pour les matchs. Et, pardon? Sélection. Tu m'as compris, monsieur. Alors, sélection. On va sélectionner les groupes pour les groupes pour la concurrence. Mais on va avoir une conversation. Nous avons eu une petite conversation hier, par exemple. J'ai eu des conversations avec lui du temps, OK? No. I had a conversation. I went back and forth. But look, this is the kind of thing I didn't want to get drawn into, which is every little exchange. You know, there are substantive meetings and conversations and negotiations, and that's not what I'm alluding to be clear. And next week, next week is an important event for Canada because we are one of the co-hosts, as you know, of the World Cup, and I'll be participating alongside President Trump, the co-host, and the FIFA president. There'll be the selections of the countries for the various groups, Canada included, and I'll see the president around there. But again, I don't want to over-signal thing. This is something I'm trying to, what matters is the negotiations when they re-engage. They haven't re-engaged yet, so that's the fundamental point. Sorry, can we wait? Oui.
Michel?
Bonjour, M. Carney. Michel Sabat, la presse canadienne.
Oui.
Que dites-vous aux écologistes, y compris vraisemblablement dans votre propre caucus, qui sont inquiets par l'idée d'un projet d'oléoduc vers la côte Pacifique?
OK, premier point. Demain, il y aura une annonce. Il y a plusieurs aspects dans l'annonce. Et ce n'est pas le moment de faire l'annonce avant l'annonce. Mais il y a plusieurs aspects. Et premier point. Deuxième point. En ce qui concerne tous les projets à l'échelle nationale, le projet Nation Building, en effet, il faut être aligné à nos objectifs climatiques. Y compris, par exemple, les projets de GNL. Par exemple, les projets de GNL au Colombie-Britannique, qui sont les plus propres, les plus durables projets de GNL, ou presque, du monde. OK? Alors, s'il y aura un oléoduc, il faut avoir une combinaison avec des grandes initiatives environnementales en même temps. Mais on peut discuter tout cela demain.
Prochaine question. Question suivie, pardon.
Mais promettez-vous à l'Alberta d'annuler l'interdiction de la circulation des pétroliers sur la côte ouest, le tanker ban? Et comment est-ce que vous allez faire accepter ça à la Colombie-Britannique?
Monsieur, c'est une bonne question pour demain.
Mais je vous la pose aujourd'hui.
Oui, je vais répondre demain. Je vais répondre demain parce qu'il faut... Okay.
Next question.
Hi. Minister Bloomberg. Today you've announced tariffs today on the U.S. for the first time, or they'll affect the U.S. for the first time since you pulled back retaliatory tariffs. How do you think this will affect the prospects of a trade deal with the U.S., and are you worried about retaliation?
So I think the first thing to say is that what we have done is to put in place adjustments to remissions and and tariffs on certain steel derivative products, as you know. And so these are products that, derivatives is a fancy name for products that are substantially comprised of steel. And it is a much more targeted level of that steel than, for example, the United States has done with their steel derivatives, which is quite broad application. The U.S. looks to calculate the proportions in steel. That approach is global. It's global. It's not targeted at the U.S. Okay, so that's the first thing that's very important. So it's a global approach, which is creating some space for Canadian steel producers to fill it. First point. Second point, with respect to the changes we're making in tariffs. So for non-free trade countries, going from 50% to 20%, the sort of tariff rate quota. This is Bloomberg, so I can talk like that, right? And for free trade countries, going from 100 to 75%, the U.S. is not included in that. So there's no change in the tariff for the U.S. or for Mexico in that regard. So I think that answers the question.
On ending the remission, I'm wondering why you chose January 31st, and is this an attempt to add pressure to the U.S.?
No.
Or is it acknowledgement that you're not going to get a deal?
I'm going to reinforce. It is a global approach. It is a global approach, and what it is, January 31st, is a judgment based on our working with companies that use these products, and the time in which it can take Canadian companies to ramp up and fulfill that demand. So you don't do it overnight because people have certain relationships, certain contracts as a consequence of that. But you also don't do it a year from now, or else it doesn't have any benefit for the Canadian industry. I mean, this is, it's $10 billion of market share that potentially, or of demand, the steel proportion of that potentially can be captured. So that's the timing is based on the adjustment timetable. There's no signal. There's no signal to any country in the world. It's just there's a signal to Canadian buyers of steel and Canadian producers of steel that there's an opportunity. Yeah.
Next question, Kissing.
Hello, Sol Paul Dutch, Global News. When it comes to lowering import quotas for foreign steel imports, are you concerned about any potential retaliation from countries like China?
Well, I look. We have we've re-engaged with China, and in a very positive way, and starting of a broader discussion of amongst other things, our broader trading relationship. There's this sector. There's clean energy sector. There's a series of important issues on the agricultural side, the seafood side. There's opportunities for Canada on the lumber side, et cetera, et cetera. And so those discussions will continue, and it's part of a broader relationship. But look, if you look at what's happening in the world, given the changes, the fundamental changes in tariff policy, you see a number of jurisdictions starting to make adjustments because of the reallocation of capacity. I'll just refer to the European Union currently has proposals around restricting free trade partners to 50%, or 48% to be precise, of their previous levels. So.
Follow-up?
And to clarify, when you go to the U.S. next week, apart from the FIFA draw, will you be looking to officially restart trade talks with the U.S. again?
Look, it's again. I don't want to over-dramatize it, so I will repeat that we are ready to re-engage on those talks when the United States wants to re-engage. Nous sommes prêts de recommencer les discussions avec les Américains en ce qui concerne des secteurs stratégiques quand les Américains sont prêts.
Next question.
It's Annie Bertrand Oliver with CTV National News.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if Canadians should interpret today's announcements as a concession that there's no deal in the near future for the steel and lumber sectors.
You should interpret the announcement that this government will do whatever it takes to protect our sectors, and not just protect them, but to help them reposition for the new global economy, and help them be in a position to build this great country. And we need these sectors to build this country. We're going to build this country at a scale and at a pace. And we need the strong sector. So we're positioning, this is part of positioning the sector for that.
You mentioned in French that you had a conversation with Donald Trump over the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that, please? And also, when you go to Washington next week, will you bring up with him the pain that our sectors are currently facing and talk about re-engaging?
I'll bring up with him what I bring up with him when I see him. These are points I do make to him. My exchange with the president yesterday was not newsworthy.
So it wasn't about...
I just responded to a question, wasn't newsworthy. How's that?
Next question.
I think that's for us to decide that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question.
Bonjour.
Radio-Canada. Pourquoi ne pas avoir consulté votre caucus de la Colombie-Britannique avant de conclure l'entente avec l'Alberta?
Comme j'ai dit il y a quelques minutes, nous avons un processus de caucus très ouvert, beaucoup de discussions. Je suis à l'heure avec les enjeux au Colombie-Britannique. J'ai plusieurs conversations avec eux. J'étais là il y a 10 jours, je crois, pour quelques jours en Colombie-Britannique, par exemple. Alors, il faut, nous sommes le gouvernement, il faut décider.
Question suivie.
Comment comptez-vous garder la cohésion au sein de votre caucus sur cet enjeu-là?
Je crois que j'ai déjà répondu à cette question, alors, mais je peux répéter. Nous avons une caucus ouvert, diverse, solide, avec une très bonne échange des idées, des politiques, des inquiétudes, des enjeux. Et comme j'ai dit, par exemple, pour cette annonce aujourd'hui, c'est bien informé par quelques membres de notre caucus.
We'll have time for one last question. Dernière question. Catherine?
Hi, this is Catherine with the Canadian Press. Speaking about today's announcement, I'm wondering if you can share why these measures were not included in the federal budget and if the tariff quotas announced in July didn't go far enough.
Well, I think what we've seen, let me start with the second bit of that, which is that the adjustments, for example, there's been additional tariff measures that have been put on by other countries, for example, the United States with respect to steel derivatives. That process has come into force and has broadened, so that has had knock-on impacts on the sector. So that's one big reason. In fact, that would almost be a sufficient reason to justify, plus the additional U.S. tariffs on lumber. So you have those aspects. And then, as I alluded to in one of the earlier answers, you see knock-on effects of what's happening in the U.S. and elsewhere on tariff measures that other countries are taking, or jurisdictions in this case. The European Union would be one example. So all of that sort of comes back onto Canada. First, that's the first, and that kind of enough. Secondly, you learn things as we have facilities in place, the ease with which companies are able to pull down the money, draw down the money, the terms. So we should always be looking at that, learning, adjusting, and that's part of what we've done. Some of this is simplification as well, but I think as well is that pulling that together, informed by discussions with industry. For example, Mr. Bedard is here, but also other members of the Canadian Steel Producers Association. Discussing with those CEOs about what's going on in their companies, what would make a difference to them. And so we craft something that keeps the market as fluid as possible, as much efficiency as possible, but also makes the biggest impact. And so that's the consequence of that. And the government is not going to produce a budget and then take the next year off. We're going to continue to move.
Last follow-up, Captain.
Thank you. And you're promising to subsidize interprovincial rail costs for steel and lumber, but what about the north, where there are no railroads and much of the building materials sail by boat? I'm wondering if the government is committed to extending the same subsidy to those territories where construction costs are exponentially higher.
Well, first off, thank you for asking a question about the territories. This is an issue. The short answer is that the rail subsidy, the 50% cut in the rail cost, is theoretically would extend to the north, but practically doesn't because, as you just said. And we have issues with transport. There's lots of issues with transport costs for the North, and one of the things that we're doing is looking at where are the biggest areas where we can reduce. And we made an announcement 10 days ago on the major projects, and part of that, and I'll finish with this, on Iqaluit Hydro. What that is saving is, tens of thousands of tons of diesel being trucked up, or not trucked up, boated up, with detriment to the environment, but also just huge transportation costs. We're moving to clean power in situ and being built out. So a lot of the infrastructure, it will take some time, but is to address those types of issues as well in the North. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Prime Minister. This was an answer press conference. C'est ce qui met fin à notre conférence de presse. Merci.
Mr. Bedard, take a couple of questions. Are you just there for, Mr. Bedard, are you just there for the follow-up, or could you just take a couple of questions?
Can we get your reaction to
your reaction to the announcement today? Would you think it's going to be of any use to your sector? Would you rather have seen tariffs?
No, I'm very supportive. I think the government has demonstrated an absolute commitment to workers across the country. And in our case, in the steel sector, to workers across the steel sector across the country. So I applaud the decision today, the announcement today. And they've been very present in the steel mills across the country, listening to the concerns right from the shop floor, and then implementing them into today's decision. So I applaud the decision.
How many jobs do you figure that you've been able to secure via these sorts of actions?
How many jobs, pardon me?
How many jobs do you think you've been able to secure via these sorts of actions?
Yeah, I won't speak for the entire industry. I'll speak for ArcelorMittal. We haven't laid off in Canada. We have 10,000 employees in Canada, and we've not laid off as a result of these tariffs. And so that's been a struggle. It'll continue to be a struggle. The actions today will help us on a trajectory back to a very secure steel industry in Canada. In Hamilton, I'm very proud of the slogan that stood for 6 decades, that our product is steel and our strength is people. It's those people, as I was listening to the Prime Minister speak today, it was those people I was thinking about. Thousands and thousands of people that will go to bed tonight applauding this decision. And so many of them have met either cabinet ministers or the Prime Minister himself on the shop floors, listening to those concerns and how we get our products to market. And Canadian mills can compete with any fairly traded material in the world. The key point is fairly traded. And I think the actions taken by the Canadian government today help level the playing field on what fair means.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bedard, if these measures don't involve Canadian industry so much, why did we do them a couple years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago? You go back to
Yeah, I would just say that this government has been absolutely present almost daily. And I meant what I said earlier, giving shop floor employees, employees in every level of our organizations, a voice, listening, and then implementing. And the strategy hasn't been etched in granite. It's been fluid because things continue to change. As the Prime Minister alluded to, the EU has changed their policy. Other countries around the world, jurisdictions around the world, are changing their policy. And so I applaud the government for being responsive and adapting as conditions around the globe change. It's certainly a global marketplace.
But should we have done this years ago? That was my question. Should we have done this before?
I can't speak to the time relevance given the unprecedented changes we've seen since January 20th and being shut out of the U.S.
I don't understand why you couldn't respond.
Certainly the export market for Canadian steel producers has been all but shut off this year.
But more sales is always good.
Pardon me?
More sales is always good.
More sales is always good. I think most of what we heard today isn't about us exporting to other countries or jurisdictions in the world. It's about unfairly traded product coming into Canada unabated and being able to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.